Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode for you guys, so sit back and enjoy. And so today our first topic is about the fallout from all of the things going on with the Tucker Nick Fuentes interview, how it's become a opening battle for 2028 Republican primary, and how it's becoming a battle for the conservative movement and the online right itself, or not the online right, the American right itself, and battle lines are being drawn. I got asked about three questions relating to this from Kingslander, Tiberian fan, and not Raven. Raven asked a similar question, but Renown. So we'll go to Raven after this because Raven has a similar question. It's a little bit different from this. So we covered a lot of the Fuentes Tucker interview last week. So we probably on last week's Mailbag. So we won't go over that again, but there's been a lot to happen since then. So this has become the number one news story within conservatism, and it's used to primarily attack Tucker. And they're attacking Tucker as a proxy for other forces within the right that traditional conservatism want to eliminate and to purge. Primarily J.D. Vance, even though that's one of the funnier things about that is Nick Fuentes himself is very much opposed to J.D. Vance. So you have that opening line, but it's also a line about purging the right of all these unwholesome elements that they don't like. The racist, the anti-Semites, the people who are not enthralled to Israel and not fully on board with the conservative agenda as set by National Review. So they're trying to open up this battlefront with this. And you can even see that with last week's Republican Jewish conference, where they spent the whole time saying Tucker's not MAGA, and pretty much all the people who were saying Tucker's not MAGA didn't vote for Trump. They might have voted for Trump in 2024, but they were all never Trumpers in 2016. I mean, Mark Levin is probably the worst example because Mark Levin is one of the leaders of this effort to purge the elements that he doesn't like. And he was an ardent never Trumper in 2016. And in the primary, he had close working relationship with DeSantis elements and was pushing DeSantis in the Republican primary. So this is a guy who is not very MAGA himself. And even I had all these mentions. It was like, well, he's MAGA now. No. This is not how it is. And also the people who are most adamant about this are some of the worst elements in the right. It is the old school, like conservatives who've never been happy with Trump, never been happy with MAGA, like National Review, DeSantoids, a lot of whom didn't even back Trump in the general election. Like, I had these guys coming in my mentions and saying, oh, you're not really MAGA, you're not true MAGA. I was like, I supported Trump in the primary and the general election. You didn't do either. And these guys were at least honest enough to admit that they didn't support him in the general election. And they're like, well, I don't care about that, but now I'm real MAGA, even though I'm still shitting on Trump in hopes that DeSantis is there. And then you have, of course, all the Zionist elements that are also involved in this, also leading the effort. But they're rallying. But in terms of relying on internet influencers, it's all people who were not Trump fans in 2023, who only became Trump fans when he won an election, like they did in 2016. And now they're wanting to define what MAGA is in the right. And it's not really working. This worked a lot more effectively in 2016 because there wasn't really any type of organization or apparatus or really that many people who were arguing for a true Trumpism in the first term. The alt-right was destroyed, and the alt-right was too unpopular to ever really take off and too chaotic. There wasn't that many Buchananite elements or Paleocon elements, and a lot of the Paleocon elements weren't very pro-Trump either. In the 2016 election, it didn't have any real platform. And so a lot of people who were able to come to define MAGA and Trumpism in the first term were people who were supporting Ted Cruz in the primary, maybe backed Trump in the general election, albeit reluctantly or didn't at all. And then all these people were able to come to define it. And you just had a different media environment back then. There was less influencer dependent. And it was much more centrally controlled or dependent on these institutions, whether it was like a conservative media outlet or a conservative think tank. It was not so much these independent content creators like Tucker, who are now, Tucker, it's a big difference. Like Tucker got his huge influence from being a Fox News host. Now he has the influence from being an independent content creator, and that goes for many other people. Now they can't really shut these people up. And it's very clear that these people were already not MAGA, and there's not that much of a welcoming party for the DeSantoids. The DeSantoids, like being anti-Trump in the primary, has been a black mark against people trying to get in the administration and has prevented many people from getting in the administration. Unlike last time where a lot of these people were anti-Trump up until election day and then were welcomed into the administration. That's no longer passing now. And they don't have as much media influence as they did before. I mean, National Review, no one gives a shit about National Review anymore. And it's like them issuing a condemnation of the Tucker Fuentes interview and Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts defending Tucker. It doesn't matter anymore. And also the fact that Heritage's president is now jumping in and lining up on the side of Tucker is a huge change. So there's the thing about the developments within the right and then the battle within the right itself. So Roberts, that would have never been possible in the past, where Roberts his first statement, he defends Tucker. He even defends interviewing him, says we shouldn't cancel Nick Fuentes, which is a huge development from what it would have been happening in the past. As you guys know with my backstory, even following people like this on Twitter in the 2010s was grounds for you getting fired. I nearly got fired from the Daily Caller in 2017. This is pre my docs, just based on me following some alt-right personalities and having some associations. Obviously, I did have associations, but simply that, guilt by association and like, look at who he follows was grounds for dismissal. And I knew a lot of other people who got fired or were pushed out or not hired for jobs simply based on social media follows. Not even retweeting, not even liking, just simply that they follow news personalities. So it's a lot less, and Heritage Foundation would have never defended that. They would have fully supported purging anyone who they may suspect of having alt-right views. Now today, you see Heritage presidents coming out and defending, a major conservative personality defending, interviewing someone like Fuentes. So a big change. I mean, obviously, he got a lot of pushback from this. He had to demote his chief of staff, who apparently was the person who crafted the video. But it's still out there. So it's setting a new standard and a new precedent for mainstream conservatism and what is there. And there hasn't been any real disavowals of Tucker from the organizations that matter, or his connections that matter, which are J.D. Vance and TPUSA, which there's a ton of pressure on those forces to have a full cutting of ties with Tucker, but they still haven't done that. And that's really pissing off people like Levin and co. So you have these battle that's going on. And now I think a lot of the things that what's happening with this is that you just have two sides in this particular battle. Now there might not be two sides in the future. And it is a little bit more complicated than just you have one side on this and you have another side on that. But for right now, what they're trying to have the battle lines drawn is these two sides where on one side you have the online right, Tucker. You even have J.D. Vance, even though a lot of the elements involved, as I said before, Fuentes are as hostile to Vance, probably more so than even the other side. And so you have this. And so not everyone on the side gets along together, as you can see with Vance and Fuentes, and also members of the other, there's rival elements of the online right that don't like each other and have different views. And also there's not even a full agreement on Trump and MAGA himself on this side. But generally what this side is supporting further, is open to further discussion of race-related subjects, is either open to or in fact advocating criticism, or not advocating, that's a weird word, but criticizing Israel, and is not horrified by that and thinks that they should, this is a topic worth discussing in the right and we shouldn't censor it. This is a side that's less beholden to traditional conservatism. It doesn't care about Ronald Reagan. It doesn't care about William F. Buckley. It doesn't care about the old institutions. It wants something new. And there's a lot of people lumped in this side. And not, as I said, not everyone agrees with everyone on all these subjects. But everyone is on that side. Whether you want to be on that side or not, you are on that side. You are on the, for lack of a better term, the new right. Even though some of the people who are new right are on the other side. But we'll just call it the new right for lack of a better term. And it's primarily the online right, and independent content creators, and is seen as a proxy battle, even though not everyone is fully in support of J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance maybe isn't fully in line with that side. He is being lumped in because it's being seen as an opening salvo in the 2028 primary. And on the other side is the old right, is the traditional conservatives. And what they believe is that we should stick to the old conservatism. Now we're going to give it a new MAGA paint. We're now pretending, either we pretend to like Trump or they may even not like Trump. But what they want Trumpism to mean is traditional conservative principles. Now, there may be a little more open to immigration restriction than, well, they're not maybe. They are more open to immigration restriction than, say, the Paul Ryan types of 10 years ago. But what they don't want is any criticism of Israel. They don't want any discussions of topics that they view as beyond the pale, which could include stuff about race, can include stuff about Western history that they don't want to discuss. Pretty much anything that Tucker discusses. I mean, some of the topics they, as you guys know, I'm not a fan of his UFO obsession and some of his claims about, being attacked in his bed by demons. But I recognize that we're on the same side, and especially in this battle. And so even though I have my disagreements with some of the things Tucker focuses on, I recognize him as an ally, and we're on the same page. Or on the same side. That's a better way of saying it. But they want to get rid of those type of people because they don't want to have those type of discussions. What they want is National Review, circa 2014, with a little bit more populist language that's more supportive of Trump, some more MAGA-ism stuff, but ultimately it's the same stuff. We are, stressing we're a nation of immigrants, that Israel is our greatest ally. We're not going to be discussing certain topics. We're going to be led by these old institutions of conservatism. We're going to have guardrails, or the guardrails that they impose. We're going to have to listen to people like Josh Hammer and all these other people without any charisma, without any talent, and without any real appeal to the ordinary base. But they're going to set the tone and decide what is conservatism and what is not. And so these elements are there. And this side is continuing to lose, and elections are in the right. They, as I said, National Review is irrelevant. They couldn't stop Trump in 2016. They couldn't stop Trump in the 2024 primary. And they continue to lose. But they still have control of a lot of these institutions. But they're even losing control of that. I mean, the fact is like Heritage is endorsing, standing with Tucker. The fact that a lot of people in the administration are more on the side of the online right than the old right, it's a change that's completely different from what it was in the 2010s. It's a much more equal fight. They were able to win outright in the 2010s. The only reason that they were not able to succeed is they offered no new ideas and nothing relevant to the era of Trump. And that allowed Tucker and other people who were able to survive the alt-right collapse to create a new, more America First nationalism, a more genuine Trumpism that would now thrive in the 2020s. But they're wanting to return back to the old days with some few additions and few changes. But it's not really appealing to people, and they don't really have much of a genuine base. Also, and obviously, Ben Shapiro, most of Daily Wire, is on that other side as well, in order to state that. So this is the battle lines being drawn. It's generally people, old right, old conservatism, that wants to control discussions, wants to have censorship, wants to be driven by the old institutions and fanatically pro-Israel. No discussion about Israel at all. No discussion about race or other red pills. This is what it's all about. And then the other side is more pro free speech in a way, and is wanting a new right, and doesn't give a shit about the old, right and its old institutions, and wants something new. And this is what's battle. And it's becoming a factor for the primary because, whether you like JD Vance or not, he is the presumptive heir to Trump. But there's gaining criticism of him. Now, we're all aware of Fuentes, criticism of Vance. I haven't paid super close attention to. I know he's still anti-Vance from last week. I watched clips and I know he's extreme. He's still very hostile towards Vance. I think he's changed a little bit on Trump. He's not as hostile to Trump as say he was in July, but I could be mistaken. So I don't want to put that as him. And that's his thing. And so a lot of people are very anti-Vance, and a lot of it, if you're very online, you've primarily heard it from further elements on the right. The fact that, he's married to an Indian wife. He's got half Indian kids. Now the complaint that his wife isn't, Christian, and apparently some of the kids might be learning Hinduism or some Hindu elements. And that he was anti-Trump in the past, and you can't really trust him, and you don't know what it's about. And so most of the criticism, if you're very online, have been coming from the far right. But there's gaining steam from the other side against Vance. And it's almost a complete reversal of what the far right says of Vance, is that the far right says he's not down with identitarianism enough. The mainstream right says he dabbles too much with the racism and identitarianism, and they don't like that. The far right says he's too beholden to Israel. The mainstream right, the traditional conservatives, think he's a closet anti-Semite, and on and on. And these are becoming the main criticisms of Vance. And also, in some ways, the farther right says he's insufficiently Christian based on his wife not being Christian. The traditional conservatives say he's too rabid of a Christian nationalist to be electable. Tablet had an article a few months ago claiming this. So they're building their side up. And I think this is really what it's going to be seen in the primaries, that we've been thinking that there's going to be a series. Some people think there's going to be some type of challenge to Vance from his right. And I think there might be. Bannon could get in. MTG could get in. I don't know if Massey would necessarily come to his right. Is that Massey would just be critical of him as Israel, but wouldn't then be the left of him on immigration and a lot of other subjects. It would just be Massey coming from Massey's own perspective. And I don't think Massey would be a serious contender in a Republican primary, nor do I think MTG would. MTG is not smart enough to be that, and would be all over the place. She would bring up that he has half Indian kids, and it's would attack him for Usha, but I don't know how. I don't think that would go well in a Republican primary. Bannon would not win, but I think he would be able to gain attention and create some pushback against some degree of pressure on Vance if he chooses to run. We'll see what it is, but none of these people are really going to upset his chances of becoming the nominee. The real problem for Vance is someone emerging to his left. And now that we're beginning to see that with his battle, and it's coming from people, it's being implied by it's being implied by Cruz, where Cruz went off in a speech over the weekend about how evil Tucker is, denounced Fuentes, and was implicitly throwing in Vance in with them. And Cruz is absolutely running for president. And Cruz has already stated his position as the old guard, super Zionist, super pro all the old conservative institutions. He's like the Ben Shapiro candidate. That is Ted Cruz. That's what he's going to run against. He is running against. He has no time for the online right. He thinks the online right is a cancer. He's not going to dally with them. He's only going to have any association with the nice influencers who will play ball. That's him. So he's already running. So you have Cruz, who's wanting to run. He's going to run on this element. You have DeSantis, who's probably going to take up on this element, but DeSantis is trying to implicitly position himself as the main opponent of Indian immigration. That's why he's doing the H-1B stuff. And then by doing that, he's wanting to make people, Republican voters, think about how Vance is married to an Indian. It's a way, he himself is never going to bring up Usha and make that an issue. Some of his surrogates will, but he himself probably won't do that. And I've already seen that with some DeSantoids who are starting to make this point. But they're also going to combine that with super Zionism. That's what's going to be, and that's going to be the combination. He's going to try to run to Vance's right on immigration while also attacking Vance for being insufficiently pro-Israel and most likely associating with Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is going to be a huge campaign issue in 2028, and it's going to be used by Vance's opponents. And a big reason that they're going to be opposing Tucker is his interview with Fuentes. And, Tucker and Fuentes hit it off. I think they're probably going to have, barring any unforeseen circumstances, and this usually happens in the online influencer space, I think they're going to get along for the future. And I could, there's a likelihood they'll do a second interview and do potentially other work. And that's gonna create more grounds to attacks on anyone associated with Tucker. But people don't want to get rid of Tucker because Tucker, you can't really cancel him as in this independent creator space. It's the same way you can't cancel Fuentes. It's like the whole right is upset about this. It's like, oh, I can't believe what he's saying. Oh, he's saying all these offensive things. But they can't cancel him because we have a more pro-free speech environment. And these guys have built their own platform. They've built their own space. And they're not beholden to, say, Fox News or, wealthy Republican donors. They are able to say what they want to say. And they don't have to really worry about cancellation. And they don't have as much censorship as there was before. And they have huge platforms. Tucker, they can disavow Tucker, but this isn't like how William F. Buckley could purge the John Birch Society, which he really didn't. He just wrote a column, and John Birch Society's, their magazine was still getting more readership than Nash Review was in the 60s. But he could say that we're in our little movement, we're not going to allow them. But at that time where there was more media control, where if, a big time person disavowing them, that made a lot of sense. But today it doesn't matter because these people aren't going to go anywhere. They're still going to have a massive following on social media. Millions of people are still going to tune into what they're saying on their podcasts. And so they can't get rid of them, even if they want to. And it's even very different from the 2010s. Like Tucker, when they knew if they kicked him off Fox News, that would shut him up. Go to the 2020s where they finally get him off Fox News, and he's still very influential. He's still very important. He probably doesn't have as much influence as he did when he hosted that Fox News show. And that's why there's far more people willing to criticize him now than when he was the number one cable news show. But he still has tremendous levels of influence they wouldn't have had as an independent content creator in the 2010s. And that's also even the same with Nick, is that Nick, he was heavily censored in the 2010s and early 2020s, and now he's getting even bigger thanks to, TikTok clips, his clips going viral on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. So they really can't stop this besides, having a speech that no one pays attention to. But they still think that they think in the old way of purging, and they've all been talking about the Buckley purging of John Birch Society and other elements, but those no longer work anymore. And that's what I was even saying, is that they want to, silence criticism of Israel, and that's just not going to work in this fight. And there's a thing about the Israel matter. I mean, some people maybe it becomes their only issue, which I think there's a lot of other issues going on. And even they will think that, like, if, Trump administration, the right does something good on immigration or race or DEI or affirmative action, they'll think, or free speech, or the Afrikaners, they all think this is meant to be a distraction from Israel. And sometimes I think that's silly. But at the same time, I don't, some people have argued that there needs to be this tactical support for Israel as a trade-off with the Zionist elements. And I don't think that really works out as we intend, because you can already see this in this battle. On the other side, the old right, they don't have a need for the online right. They don't really have it. They already have their own influencers. They already have their own media networks, and they don't trust the online right. They think that they're, not reliable. They also know that if you've ever not been just immediately devastated or horrified by criticism of Israel or some element of anti-Semitism, you are suspect in their eyes. They want people who are going to go full on, express this moral revulsion against any type of hint of anti-Semitism. And the on the right can never do that. And so, the type of, some people think that okay, we can, those, elements that we can fully align with and be there. It's not quite going to work out as intended. Now, they're still going to be on the right, but you're going to have those tensions with them, and you can't really be fully in line with them and hope that they can make the deal, because at the end of the day, they don't really want the online right support, and they want to minimize it and defang it and make it irrelevant in order to have a more reliable right. And that's the case with the old guard. So there's not really that type of tactical alliance could be there. Now, that granted, does that mean, whenever, the right does something else, that we need to revert back to caring about Israel or saying that this is a central issue? No, that's not what I'm saying. But I also think as foreign policy, just like a general interest in American foreign policy, it's not really working for us. We keep telling them to respect the peace deal. They're not respecting it. We keep telling them to stop trying to expand the war. They keep expanding the war. They're not really listening to us, and it's creating problems for our entire foreign policy. And so I don't think it's in America's general interest to continue that type of arrangement. Is that we need to create a harder line on them and rein them in order to benefit, a genuine America first foreign policy. And these guys clearly don't care about that. Is that they need to annex the West Bank, and they can ethnically cleanse Gaza, and they actually should go into Syria as well. And it's this is completely antithetical to our own national interests, and so we shouldn't allow that. But that aside, and that's another reason why, you would have to, regardless of your disagreements, or it'd probably be more than disagreements, conflicts with Tucker and Fuentes, we are all on the same side in this battle. And I know, and probably even a lot of people who hate Fuentes and Fuentes hates them are probably going to find themselves on this side. But this is the matter is that it's, for the other side, the old guard, there's no real differences. There's no distinctions. We're all in the same boat, and they want to sink that boat. There's no I'm one of the good guys. No, they're we've got other people. We've got Josh Hammer. We don't need you. And I'm gonna push them back in the water and let them sink. They don't really need us. So that's something to keep in mind. But we're gonna go to the element of what's happening with the primary battle. So I outlined Cruz and DeSantis and what they're going to be going against for Vance. You also have Josh Hawley emerging, which it'll be interesting what Hawley wants to do on Israel, if he's going to go full Zionist, or is he going to try to go to, I don't know if it would be right, or he'd take a different tack on Israel from Vance and try to be more anti-Israel than Vance. Now, Hawley's had some famous tweets where he's you can take me out on a slab if you think I'll ever denounce Israel, but he's a politician, so he could change that. But Hawley's main thing is going to be attacking tech and trying to claim that Vance is on the side of transhumanists and trying to go with this, wholesome Chungus populism, which is probably not going to appeal to people. And he probably won't take it off, but his campaign probably won't take off, but he's already trying to merge and set himself up as a contender in 2028. So you have those possibilities. You also have Youngkin and some other people who could throw their hat in the ring. I don't think that they would be as serious as those three. I'm not even quite sure how serious Hollywood. Cruz and DeSantis will get a level of support. But the most serious contender or challenge to Vance is Rubio. most reports have saying that Rubio's not wanting to challenge him. He's, open to being vice president, but he sees an opening. There's an opening emerging for him. And Rubio has more potential than Cruz. He's more likable than Cruz. He has more of a personality, more charismatic, much better a politician than DeSantis and Hawley. And he would also be closer to Trump and seen more as pro-Trump than those three, because those three candidates are all going to say that they're pro-Trump and we're carrying on the Trump legacy, but they're not going to be, in a lot of ways, they're going to be running as implicit criticisms of what the Trump administration did. Rubio would be running on carrying on Trump's legacy just as much as Vance would. And he would be able to get those donors that really don't want to back Vance. And you can already see this is happening, is that a lot of these Jewish donors think that Vance is insufficiently reliable on this issue and might be a closet anti-Semite, and he's associated with that dangerous person that is Tucker, and they might want to back someone else. And Rubio is probably the strongest challenger to Vance. So you're already seeing these lines emerge. And I've always been thinking that, the primary would be a presidential apprentice, with Trump wanting all these people to compete for who will be most pro-Trump and who will worship him the most and who will carry on his legacy the most. And he'd prefer to have it with his cabinet secretaries to be like Vance, Rubio, Noem, Hegseth, maybe some really pro-Trump senators like Cruz would have to go out there and be extremely pro-Trump. But that's not really how it's shaping up. Cruz, Hawley, and DeSantis are not going to really participate in presidential apprentice. Nor will Youngkin or anybody else who might try to run. The only people who would really participate in that are Rubio and Vance. Hegseth and Noem, I don't think. Noem, if she tries to run, that is going to be a complete clown show. I don't think Noem is. I feel like Noem's going to have some scandals that's going to push her out of the administration. We'll see. But I don't see. Noem would like to run, but I don't think she is going to run. Hegseth, I don't think has what it takes to run. I could also see him getting pushed out of the administration due to scandals. And so there's not going to be enough people to run for presidential apprentice. And it's going to be less about how much we love Trump and more about the future of the right. And also ban an MTG Massey element. If they all form one, rally behind one candidate or do their own thing, they're also not going to play presidential apprentice either. So Trump would like that, but he's not going to have enough candidates who are going to do that. I think the only two candidates who are going to actually want to do that, and Rubio is Vance and Rubio. But they're both going to just say, hey, we're carrying on Trump's legacy against these other candidates. So the path is, Vance is going to have a tough primary. And the right, and people want the primary to be a proxy battle for the right. And regardless of whether you hate Vance or, think he's the greatest thing ever, he is going to be the online right candidate as determined by his enemies. You might have someone a bit more online right than him, like Bannon. But Bannon's if you hear about race and stuff, he's worse than Vance on those issues. But I mean, he's stronger on Israel and some other things. But, he's got some loopy ideas about other things. And none of them are going to ever emerge as somebody who could get close to double digits from that side. He is going to be that candidate in 2028. Now, some people, I don't know if people will rally behind him. I think there will still be a large element of the online right that will oppose him. I don't know which candidate they will back. They will certainly not back Rubio, Cruz. DeSantis is going to try to get some of those people, but I don't know if that's going to work. I mean, it didn't work in the 2024 primary. They're certainly not going to back Youngkin or Hawley. I mean, some people might go along with Hawley depending on where he stands on Israel, but those battle lines will draw. But for the most part, they're going to attack him for being too close to the online right and too, suspiciously racist, anti-Semitic, too in line with these extreme ideas and too unelectable. And we're starting to see that line of attack emerge in the controversies of last week. So But I mean, I think there's a white pill from this is that what you saw last week was completely unthinkable a decade ago. There never would have happened. It was unthinkable even 5 years ago, maybe even unthinkable 2 years ago. The right is moving in a direction that the old guard can't control because the online space allows for people to choose what they want to listen to and what they want to hear, and they want to listen to people who are relevant, entertaining, and charismatic. And the old guard doesn't have any talent and charismatic people. I mean, Shapiro still has, a degree of talent, but he's like older. They don't really have younger people. I mean, Brylan Hollyhan is not the answer is not going to be a huge internet sensation. So they don't really have anyone. And they still have a lot of institutional support. They still have a ton of money. And they still have and they certainly have a lot of influence over Republican politicians. They don't have control over the online space, and the online space increasingly determines the trajectory of American conservatism. And so they can't put this all back in a box. They cannot turn back the clock to 2015. It's a whole new era, and there's going to be a massive battle over this in the 2020s over the shape of conservatism. And I think the new right will prevail, in my opinion. But we'll have to see who gets the nomination in 2028. I think if it's Cruz or Rubio, that's not a good sign. Even with the problems with Vance, I admit that there's like some suspicions and reasons for skepticism around Vance, but and you would if there's a better alternative, I would be open to it. But at the moment, I don't see that alternative. I know Fuentes was like that, but we'll see. We'll see if what Fuentes' position is if Fuentes is expanding. I mean, even this thing, and I think most of our audience, and even I strongly disagree with his takes on Trump and some other things. But he keeps having a higher ceiling to go. And you think that he's hit his ceiling and then he breaks through. And some of it is unlike a lot of other content creators, he's able to adapt to the moment. I mean, think about the Kirk situation. Unlike a lot of other people, including Tucker, who started to blame Israel, he blamed the leftists. So, and that, in a lot of ways, his response to Kirk helped further broaden his appeal. So we'll see what happens with what he decides to do in 2028, whether, he decides that his goal is to bring down Vance, to signal his influence over the right, and maybe he would think that it doesn't matter who else is the other candidate as long as it's not Vance, or if he decides that maybe it's in his better interest to go with Vance. I don't know what it will take. I'm not him, but these are going to be. He's also going to be a factor in the 2028 primary. Now, a deciding factor. There's not really a single deciding. I mean, the real deciding factor is Trump and the economy and a lot of other things. But in terms of content creators and influencers who are going to be there, yeah, he's going to be one of those people that news reporters are going to be paying attention to. So, and that's just the new state of the right. And so there's a lot to the 2020s could be an interesting decade for conservatism. So a lot to look forward and a lot to analyze. So that is my discussion on that. So we are gonna, I discussed that for nearly 40 minutes. So we're gonna go quickly through a lot of these other questions. I'll go to Ravens first because it was related to that. What explains the sudden and intense hatred of Donald Trump by conservative Zoomers online? I'm confused because it seemed like everyone was on the same page in 2024. And sometimes they go even further by saying they wish they had voted for Kamala. Instead, is this another case of extremely online psychosis, boredom? Sometimes it's boredom. I think that's a lot of it's also driven by the fact that there's hostility towards the old guard and they think it's associated with Trump. But I see it go back and forth. Some of these guys are one week they'll be pro-Trump, the next week they'll be very anti-Trump. I don't think there is set on that position. The only people I really see who are set on that position are kind of the older white nationalists like the TRS types that viewed, they think like Trump ran over the dog, and they can't admit Trump does anything right. They were even like trying to say that Kevin Roberts' announcement on Tucker and Fuentes, which was like a huge thing, as a signal like how much the right has changed on Israel and a lot of in cancel culture and many other things. And they're like, this is a trick because they can't admit anything is good going forward. But I think in some ways just boredom, and some of these people get, he's cucked, and I think a lot of these guys haven't been around long enough, and they think that there's going to be, there's some, candidate waiting in the wings to be even better than Trump. But like I said, out of the three people that would be the right-wing candidate, so to speak, in the primary, none of them are very satisfactory. I mean, Bannon, I guess, is the most serious one, but it's Bannon. MTG, I think she explains herself, and Massey is like terrible on immigration and a lot of other subjects. So they don't really have that person yet. But I think it's just kind of boring. I think it's also some of the issues. Israel has become one of the most important issues for people online. There's all these normies who now think that like Israel controls the government, and they think Trump's too pro-Israel. They're also upset about the Epstein stuff. So it happens, but I think I've been around this for a long time. I've seen people's opinions shift over, veer from one place to the other. I think that it seems the internet space is less hostile to Trump than it was, say, in July. And some people just forget and move on to other subjects. Somebody actually asked about this, a similar question. I think it was Ken. Yeah, Ken, this is also part of this. He's like, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it kind of feels like we've moved on from Charlie Kirk pretty much entirely. We have, because it's like all news events. Like, you can't maintain interest in the news event. Even if it's a massive news event, you can't maintain interest in it. And there's no real developments from it. I think, and there's a lot of right-wingers who are trying to be like, well, where's all the mass arrests? Well, I think it was tough to have mass arrests when, they're trying very hard to have mass arrests. They've announced that they're arresting Antifa terror cells, and they're having a tough response, or trying to have a tough response in Portland, and people are protesting ICE facilities. They've arrested that former Media Matters girl who was protesting at ICE, and some other people, and hitting them with serious charges. So they're trying to go crack down on the left as much as they want, but a lot of the right wanted is like them to arrest every Democrat for supporting terrorism, which is just not going to happen. And also is that it's harder to maintain as much interest in a topic 2 months out. So, yeah, I think people have moved on from that. And now it's also the Charlie Kirk death is allowing these feuds and wars to occur out in the open that wouldn't have happened in the past. Kirk was a centralizing force and the most influential political operator on the right. And he kept a lot of these differing elements of the coalition together. And fewer people were willing to criticize Kirk because they all wanted to speak at TPUSA, and they all knew he had the year of Trump. And so they were much more hesitant of criticizing him than they were of Tucker. And also Tucker probably was, more hesitant of going further to the right or going and interviewing people that he didn't want to interview, like Fuentes, because Kirk was apparently very mad that Dinesh D'Souza interviewed him, Fuentes. So, you've had now all these feuds and animosities break out into the open, and there's no one to try to corral all these people together. And it's been in a way it's a destabilizing effect, but it's also probably something that was bound to happen. So yeah, people have, but it's like standard news story. It just happens. It's what we move on from things. He had another question, which I'll answer briefly. People send a lot of sports questions. I do have to remind you is that I'm not closely following every sport, so I might not have a good answer for this. So he said, with the UT Vols out of playoff contention, can we get something of a premature postmortem on the season? I don't really have much to say. I didn't closely follow college football enough this year. I watched the Georgia game that they should have won, but they lost it. It's tough in college football with the transfer portal. There's a lot more parity. I mean, look at the fact that like Vanderbilt is one of the best teams in the SEC. You know, there's a lot of things happening new and different in college football, and it's harder to. And most of the games they've lost has been by nail biters and stuff. So, and they also lost from the transfer portal. They lost a really good quarterback to the portal. He demanded more money, and now they've had to go on with inferior quarterbacks. So, but I haven't been closely following enough for a detailed post-mortem. Concerned Citizen has a question with sort of related to our opening one. Is any thoughts on the Usha, Erica, JD Love triangle? There's nothing to it. That's my thoughts on it. It's something being pushed by libtards. So no real thoughts on that. Another sports question that I don't have much of an answer for, but Max Zoid has wanted my thoughts on the World Series. He thought it was the greatest one ever. But once again, I unfortunately did not watch it, so I have no real thoughts on it. I don't follow baseball enough to really have detailed thoughts on it. Funny enough, for all the old head Greer head pledge believers, the only real sport I've been following this fall has been the NFL. So the only real thoughts I would have on any sport has been mostly the NFL. But I didn't watch it, so I don't have any. But my general thoughts on the state of baseball, I did see there seemed to be a lot more interest in the World Series this year than in years past. So maybe there's a return to caring about baseball. I've never been the biggest baseball fan, but I understand that it's a very white-coated sport, especially compared to the other pro sports, with the exception of hockey. It's nice to go to. I've thought about getting into it, but I've yet to get into it so far. But no real general thoughts on the state of baseball at the moment. We got a couple of questions about Maduro and the regime change there. One from Dave and another one from Nitro. And he said, Nitro, I'll read Nitro questions. What do you think about the possibility of the Trump admin attempting regime change in Venezuela? I'm actually opposed to this. Now, I don't have a problem with like us intervening in Latin America. It's our backyard. We can do what we please. And I have no problem with us blowing up drug dealers and their boats. I think that's cool. I think we should do more stuff like that in Mexico and elsewhere. And I have no problem with, if there's an election going on in Latin America and one side is in our interest and the other side is hostile to our interest, that we try to rig the election. But I don't think it's going to, the Maduro thing there, it's very risky because we've tried to coup him for a while. Trump, the first admin, tried to do it. We backed like these military attempts and they all failed. We even sent like some type of mercenary force at some point and it failed. I don't think that there's really a sizable enough of the population to have a successful civil war. And if they do have a revolution, it's going to create instability and they're going to send all these migrants. Even if it's easier to keep them out here, it's going to send them elsewhere in Latin America, and that creates instability because all these other countries, neighboring countries, want to get rid of the Venezuelans. And a lot of the reason they were coming up in the Biden administration was because these countries were pushing all of them out. They've had like refugees from that country. And so if they have warfare there, if they have violence, that's going to send even more Venezuelans out, destabilize the rest of the region, potentially create, support base for further anti-American leftist elements in Latin America, and potentially create another migrant surge. Now, the good thing, and being pro-Trump, I think the Trump administration would handle this a lot better than Biden, but you still don't want to create that instability in our backyard, and I think that's really what would happen there. I mean, if there was an election, and there was somebody that we could hope rig the election for and put pressure on them to ensure that person wins, I would be in favor of that. But because, Maduro himself is creating that instability that's sending all these people outside of Venezuela. And we would like to have a Bukele there who could keep control and keep all these people in Venezuela rather than sending them out. But I don't think the way of regime change is likely to result in some type of civil war. And that's going to send even more Venezuelans out and create more instability in the region. And I don't think that's really in our interests. But I don't have any moral opposition towards it, though. Somebody also asked, on a Gillis Enjoyer also asked on Tucker's praising Maduro's government for being socially conservative. I thought that was very stupid. Like I said, even though Tucker's on our same side, we can still disagree with him. No, the Maduro government is so dumb. I rolled my eyes when he's like, well, guess what? Did you know that they don't allow gay marriage? Ha! Wow. So maybe they're left wing economically, but they're socially conservative. No, that is such a stupid argument. I don't really care about brown countries not allowing gay marriage. I'm not going to stand some African shithole just because they don't have gay marriage. I mean, I expect that. I don't care whether they have gay marriage or not. I don't think we should promote it there. I don't give it because, granted, but I also don't care that they don't allow it. It's like, I don't care about third world country, and I'm not going to praise them for doing this. It's like, we're not going to send there. I don't know if Zimbabwe still has it, but we'll say that Zimbabwe doesn't allow gay marriage. We're not going to just start soy jacking over it. No, that's such a stupid argument. I always don't like that because that's also an argument that, Putin's really, Putin, I think is a complicated matter, but Putin is really like leaned in on that as like, oh, we're standing against gay marriage and stuff. And then it's like, you're supposed to ignore how he's flooding the areas that they've taken control of in Ukraine with Central Asian migrants, but, and also trying to send migrants into Europe. I don't think like Putin is our main enemy, but I don't think he's like our guy. But then people will be like, well, he stands against gay marriage, so now he's our guy. I don't like the type of socially conservative third worldism. And I think it's rather stupid. You could still oppose gay marriage within the West without having to, and some of the trans stuff without then soy jacking over Maduro. So that's my thoughts on that. Second question from Gillis Enjoyer is like thoughts on this latest train attack in the UK and if reform can actually fix things. I think that Farage is a squish. Well, it's going to help reform, but like once again, this is like their only option. There's like 6 competing. First off, the train attacker it appears it was just a crazy black guy, not a terror attack. But then they're like, well, he's a British national, but if you look at the clips, he doesn't look like a Anglo-Saxon. I think it's going to further radicalize the country against immigration. Even when they say it's British national, like more Britons get that this person's not actually British than, say, Americans do. If they say it's an American national who did this, who is a homegrown terror. A lot of Americans fall for this shit, but they're less inclined to in the UK. So that's going to help reform. But reform, Farage has a lot of his issues, but there's no real challenge. They have all the, as I said, they have like 6 competing based alternatives. They have the one with Rupert Lowe, which he's like more right wing, but he's less talented of a politician, and he seems to be more inclined to just post things online. I mean, he's good. I don't want to criticize him, but I don't think he has what it takes to be a real political leader to challenge Farage. You have the Homeland Party, which broke up over two sides deciding whether they should be more sympathetic to Nazis. Or it seemed like there's some if your party is having to split over the Nazis, it's probably not a good idea. Or optics, as they were having issues where the older Homeland Party were trying to impose a stricter optics control in the younger guys, and the younger guys didn't like it. But they're not going to have a serious alternative. They're not running any candidates. There's like some more kosher, extreme anti-Islam groups, like Tommy Robinson and other people who are trying to challenge Farage. There's Patriotic Alternative, which is the more Wignat version of Homeland, but they're not running candidates and they're opposed to voting. None of them are presenting a challenge to Farage. So if you're an average British voter, Farage is your best option. And conservatives are a joke, and it's good for your side for reform to win, even with Farage's problems. But you go with the best option you have. That's my opinion on it. And I think even reform winning is progress. Might not be as much progress as you want, but it's progress, and it's a sign that the public is moving in the right direction. So even if Farage is not the ideal person, he's the best you have, the best option you have. Let's go with pay-per-view. Pay-per-view has a question. He said, how much of a black pill is that the police officer who shot and killed Sonia Massey, the black woman who threw boiling water at the dispatch officer, was convicted of second-degree murder, while conservatives love saying woke is in retreat, white guilt, and the joke of trial by jury in the modern day still loom large. Yeah, not that surprising. I mean, it's kind of I looked at in the Springfield, Illinois area. It's whiter than I thought. I'm not particularly sure how white the jury is, but first, the real surprising thing is Sonia Massey. I thought she was like in her 50s. She's 36. And they're like this grandma type person. And it's like, dude, this woman's 36. And it's like, whoa. That was the real shocking part of it when I was looking into this. But yeah, that was, I think the officer was in the right because this woman was about to throw boiling water on them. That can count as a weapon. And he shot her. But, if you're looking at this, it's like, oh, it's a mentally ill woman. She was in need of help. And shooting her was the wrong thing. They could say they should have tased her or something. It's one of those cases where the average person is going to feel like it's a woman. She's mentally ill. Not in a way that's dangerous, but it was like guaranteed to sympathy. And she needs help. She doesn't need to be shot. And there's other ways that they could have dealt with the situation. So those cases still happen. I think the fact that that's one of the cases where body cam footage probably damned the officer. Well, a lot of people say it's like body cam footage ended George Floyd stuff. This body cam footage would have, created another Floyd-like situation, especially with the interpretation that everyone have had is that, and I even had conservatives like Martyr Made were getting really upset about this. And you look at that situation there and, it's open to interpretation. And in the 2010s, they would all saw this as the worst thing ever, especially the fact that he shot a woman. So I mean, like the boiling water was no threat. And I guarantee that's what the jury thought. So I don't, woke is in retreat. I don't think this really has to deal with it. It's just like ordinary American nature that they get squeamish about this stuff and they're going to think the cop's a bad guy. So that's my answers to that. K-Max, he said he had 2 questions for the mailbag, but I don't know what. I will save one for the mailbag. Actually, I'll just answer them. I'm going to say for the mailbag this week, it's my birthday. I'm not sure if I'm going to have the mailbag on Wednesday or Thursday. I'm going to repeat this at the end of the podcast because I might have an article that I'm posting on AmCon and I'm going to post it on my Substack and we'll just wait until Thursday. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do for the mailbag, but I might be having that on Thursday rather than my birthday Wednesday. Might be taking off on the mailbag. I mean, maybe it's not the ideal birthday to answer, 80 questions or something, but we'll see what happens. I'll just answer both of them for today. Now, K-Max, that does not mean you send 3 more questions for Wednesday. You can send maximum 2 questions, preferably 1 for this week. We're going to try to hit, I'm going to say for this week's mailbag, I say sometimes you can have 3, but this week it's going to be a hard 2 unless they're extremely good questions. And if they are a bad question, I'm just not going to answer them. So his first question is Kendrick Lamar's Luther departs Hot 100, leaving no rap songs in the top 40 for the first time in 35 years. How excited should we be about this news? Does it represent a cultural shift? Yeah, it does signal a cultural shift. Rap isn't as popular, and it hit its peak a few years ago. I think I was reading the article. I think it was 2021 or 2022 where they were like 30% of sales. Now it's not that much of a decline. It's like a quarter of the market, but it is a decline, and I think that's it's having to deal with a lot of other competitions. Having to deal with reggaeton, which I guess isn't counted as rap. It's rap influence. It's having to deal with country. It's having to deal with pop. And I think the taste of other people is just changing. I also think that as like millennials don't keep up with rap as much as they did as they get older, they're more listening to Taylor Swift and country or like whatever the standard pop is. And so it's moving on. And yeah, blackness as cultural cool is in decline, as you can see by this song dropping out of the top 40. So it is a big shift. It is a big shift as rap has been the dominant music for the last 20 years. I would say that it replaced rock as the primary non-pop genre sometime in the 2000s. You could even maybe say it's the late 90s. And it's been that the case. And I think country is increasingly replacing it as the non-pop genre of choice instead. Also, pop is just becoming even bigger as for what people's taste is. So, yeah, and also people just listen to older stuff. People don't keep up with newer music as they used to. So, yes, it's a big change. Greerhead Pledge is inevitable. It's gaining steam, and maybe this is a sign Zoomers will begin to adopt the Greerhead Pledge. So we hope for that. Second tweet, based on your tweet about civil strife in the U.S. versus U.K. My question is, do you base this on the UK having more violent immigrants than the US does? No. I base this on the fact that they have more violent whites than we do. I also think the fact that they have riots. I mean, there are no white riots in the US. The fact that it's like all this like bread riot shit. I mean, there are not going to be real bread riots. There might be some looting here and there. We are not going to have bread riots. And people are like, the white ruralites are going to rise up. Yeah, 6-year-old people are going to start committing violence. No. The thing is the UK, they still have a large urban white working class population that will flip out. We see this with the hooligans. We see this with riots over the migrant violence. They have more whites willing to take to the street. Now, they're not going to have a civil war because they don't have weapons, but you're going to have a lot more of these racial battles between the immigrants and the urban white working class. You're not going to see that in America. Because, with the exception of J6, there has not been a right-wing white violence, mass violence outside of that. But even J6 is, most people just walked in and took selfies. It was very different from what they do in the UK. And that's also the same in Europe. So we don't really have a large urban white working class population to commit this level of violence. We don't really have hooligans. So that's why there's the case for civil strife. I think also the immigrants themselves are more willing to organize for political violence and action as well. There is a case with the immigrants. There was this recent demonstration where all these Muslims were armed. A lot of them were carrying weapons, and they all wore masks, and they're all young men, and they're marching menacingly. I think it was in London. Even blacks don't do that. Our blacks, I mean, they're still, violent and criminal, but they don't really take that into a type of political demonstration like that. So you have the greater chance of there being these type of race battles in a way that is similar to what the United States experienced in the early 20th century, because most of our race riots then were battles between whites and blacks, like Tulsa. There was a Detroit riot during World War II. There were battles between whites and blacks. And I think you're going to see a lot of that in Britain. And that will be their case of civil strife. But it will not be quite civil war. Due to Normatives asked, do I have any thoughts on Bill Gates' statement about climate change and it signifies changing attitudes or policies into the future? Yeah, it signals. I think that, the peak of concern around climate change is probably ending. I think that they made all these huge predictions about climate change and it lead to humanity's demise and all this stuff. And now we've only got 4 more years to live and this stuff has happened. And I also think that they realize that a lot of this rhetoric, is, especially when it's used in Europe, is done to cripple the economy. It's like Europe is destroying itself over climate change hysteria. And that's not good for business. So I think that's why a lot of these guys like Bill Gates and others are having second thoughts about their climate change hysteria and wanting to shift in a different direction. So I think it is important. I mean, he's probably not the right person to say this because whatever Bill Gates says, now everyone opposes. But it does indicate that, powerful people, a lot of business leaders, are not keen on this stuff anymore because they've probably what they've seen in Europe and how it has the potential to cripple the economy, and also that a lot of these predictions just didn't turn out true. Silly Billy asks, do you think the public's opinion will shift even more towards anti-immigration because of groups like the Somalis who seem too nationalistic? I just watched the video of the Minneapolis mayoral candidate waving the Somali flag, speaking in a different language, and talking about his home country. Obviously, this pisses people off on the right wing, but do you think it will start to piss off normies as well? Absolutely. Absolutely. This stuff, overt, like, foreign nationalism on our soil really pisses people off. It's like, there's still the idea that everyone here should be 100% American, and waving foreign flags and all that stuff. It's like you saw that with the ICE riots, anti-ICE riots, where they're all flying the Mexican flag. That really pissed people off and turned people against them. So yeah, if immigrants are too nationalistic, yes, it'll increase anti-immigration support. The issue is that a lot of immigrants, we need them almost to be more nationalistic than they are. Now, some groups are like that, like Somalis, Mexicans when they get, ICE is around. But a lot of these immigrants, they come and then they just, fully, they adopt to American Slav culture and they stop waving their old flag. Now, you still see this in examples, you see this with Indians, they have these massive rallies for Modi. You see this a lot of the Palestinian protests and them waving foreign flags, and I think that's also why a lot of the public hasn't been not that sympathetic to the Palestinian causes, because they see all the protesters and say they're waving American flags and being patriotic, they're burning American flags, and they look foreign and exotic, and that turns people off to that issue. So if the immigrants continue waving the flag, it's great for us. We need them to do this more often, so we push the public more in our direction. Let's see who else we've got. Costco Frank has a question. He said, I notice a higher degree of institutional tyranny in the eastern U.S. compared to the western U.S. For example, there's no California version of the Speed Air case or what we saw with Douglas Mackey, Daniel Penny, the Brunswick Three, that's the Ahmaud Arbery guys, and the Whitmer entrapment. Are Eastern libs more true believers, or do the higher numbers of blacks and Jews have something to do with it, or is something else going on? I don't really see the connection. First off, Doug Mackey, Ricky Vaughn was federal charges. Daniel Penny would have been charged on the West Coast, especially on San Francisco. And San Francisco is very left-wing. The issue is that there's not really any right-wingers around for them to persecute. I think New York just has more right-wingers for them to persecute, like they did with VDARE. Ahmaud Arbery happened in the South, so that's coming in a conservative area. That would have happened anywhere else. I mean, look at the Sonia Massey thing that happened in Illinois. Whitmer was in Michigan. I don't want to say that's the East Coast, and that was also federal. The feds, as was Douglas Mackey and Ricky Vaughn. So I don't really see the connection there or the distinction between the two. I mean, there's more tyranny in the Western U.S. If you look at Portland, Washington, California, and a lot of their COVID codes, it was worse than most places on the East Coast. I think that there's just more right-wingers and conservatives for them to persecute in certain areas like New York than there is in California. And so that's one of the few differences. But a lot of this stuff is federal government. So if Ricky Vaughn lived in Washington State, they would have charged him there. So that would have been a little bit different for that theory. Vahaisu asks, Mystery Grove recently listed Exorcist 3 as a top 5 horror film, and Thomas77 has previously put it on his top films list. I was wondering if you've seen it and feel the same way. I like the recent IQ supplement. I think you should continue next year by covering horror from the 80s. Next year, we're likely going to do H.P. Lovecraft IQ supplement for the IQ supplement. Count Gerstein will make a reappearance. I mean, it was... people were really terrified by Count Gerstein introducing the show, but I think we might have more appearances from Count Gerstein next year for Halloween week. But no, I really like Exorcist 3. I don't know if I would say it's a top 5 horror film, but it's a very good film. I enjoy watching it more than the original Exorcist. One, George C. Scott and Brad Dourif are incredible actors, and I will watch anything with them in it. The female lead and the mom in Exorcist is really annoying. Also, the daughter is, she's like 11, so she's not really that good of an actress. And I would say it's a much more enjoyable film than the first Exorcist. But it's also a stranger film because there's a lot of things thrown in. Like the actual Exorcist and Exorcist 3 was thrown in by the studio, and they had to reshoot a bunch of scenes because they insisted on Exorcist and some other things. So it's less of a cohesive whole than the first one. And also William Peter Blatty, who wrote the book, is probably not as talented as director as Friedkin, but I think it just works better. You have better performances, better lines from it. There's a whole album, Frontline Assembly's Tactical Neural Implant, which is an industrial album that heavily samples Exorcist 3 throughout the album. And so I already heard a lot of Exorcist 3 before I even watched the movie. But I really like it. It's a very good movie. Top 5 horror, I'm not sure, but I would highly recommend it and say it's a very good horror film. And I would say it's better than the first one. So let's see who else we've got. We still got a question from Kingslander. He said, do you think we might end up with a hagocracy in the future with women pulling ahead of men and refusing to settle down? Could the girl bosses of today end up being a potent political force 30 years from now, motivated solely by being better than they are old and undesirable? Absolutely. No, I wrote an article about this last year, I think, because there's these guys who are claiming that, the single cat men are going to be as much of a problem as the single cat ladies. I'm like, that's not the case. Because, first off, the guys who are, middle-aged and elder, who are completely unmarried, are just seen as losers. They're not going to organize themselves as a force. They're going to be easily ignored and pushed aside. And a lot of those guys, if they're that miserable, they'll take their own lives, sadly. Women don't. They instead impose their misery on the rest of society. And there's going to be a lot more of those women. Because a lot of the guys who don't end up married, they're single and alone. And, they're not making a lot of money. They don't have power and influence. But a lot of the women who are single, alone, are like girl bosses and have a lot of power. And they're more willing to organize themselves as a cohesive interest group. So there's going to be more of that. Absolutely. They're going to wield a lot of power and influence over society in the future. So it's not only going to be that we're going to be, geriatrics have a lot of tremendous influence, but they're going to be single female geriatrics and middle-aged women, and it's going to create a lot more insanity in our society. So, there's going to be a lot of resentment towards young men and a lot of demands for their needs to be met. So, yes, I definitely see that as a possibility in the future. Newland Refugee has 2 questions. He said, I'm extremely confused by the AI girlfriend thing. Don't low status men still go to the strip club or get a hooker? It seems like in today's libertine age and the internet, it would be easier than ever. What good does an AI girlfriend have if it can be physical? Well, it's hard to get a hooker. There's more risk to it. You can get arrested. And people don't want to do things with, it's lower risk. And it also doesn't seem to satisfy these men. I mean, with prostitutions and other things. So I think some guys will do it is that they're just really lonely, but the guys who are going to do it are going to be very low status and really off the dating market. And so women are not going to be that upset about it, because women, the last thing that they will ever want to do is to date a low status guy. That's a worst nightmare for them. And so they aren't really bothered by more of these guys getting AI girlfriends. Like having an AI girlfriend is going to be a red flag for them anyway. But I guess guys are lonely and just want someone to talk to, and they likely don't have anyone to talk to. And thus the AI girlfriend. But for women, it's going to be more of an issue, because I think there's be women with more options. And women also really want that type of emotional satisfaction that can only come from someone talking them up or gassing them up, and much more so than the men. I think the men turn to it is that they have no one to talk to, no even guy friends, and then that's why they get an AI girlfriend. But we'll see how it works out in the future. Second question, do you believe prosperity makes people left wing? I know that desperation doesn't necessarily make you right wing, but it seems too much milk and honey makes any society soft and more tolerant. It makes them soft and tolerant. I mean, as prosperity just makes people more content with the status quo and more hostile towards radical change. Anything that threatens that prosperity, they oppose. Anything that doesn't, they're more tolerant of. It definitely makes society in a way softer, and more content. But I don't know if left wing is quite the right term, because they'll just come down on anything that's opposed to status quo. And in the 1920s, we had at that time unprecedented level of prosperity, and we were probably our most right wing that we ever were in the 1920s. So it's just a matter of what they view as threats to prosperity and what they're willing to accept that doesn't threaten that prosperity. But it definitely makes them more content and you could say softer. But I don't think it inherently makes them more left-wing. It just they're more supportive of the status quo and more suspicious of anything that might threaten the status quo. So that's New England Refugee. And I think the last, if I did not get to your question, make sure to harass me for either Wednesday or Thursday. But we got LK Rurik. Last question he asks, how much worse is conservative female misandry and sexual depravity respectively going to get? I'm not sure what the sexual depravity is. I don't really see. I guess he was thinking about the two sides of it, is that there's high libido conservative women and then the low libido conservative women, and there's competing forces within conservatism within that. I don't know about the high libido. They'll probably increase with more women getting into office, and generally if you're a woman getting into office, you have more masculine traits and probably a higher libido than the average woman. So you're probably going to see a lot more Nancy Mace types. But in terms of female misandry, it's going to get worse, because a lot of these women are not going to be getting married, and they're going to be more encouraged by older conservatives to hate men. And I have an article tomorrow about this, and it's going to get worse. Hatred for men is going to be such a common political tactic, because it comes from the old who hate young men, old men included, and it comes from women their age. And it's why a lot of young guys turn to any influencer who simply doesn't tell them to fuck off and die. And or tells them that they need to stop having hobbies like video games. And their whole life needs to be centered around their fat wife. And anyone who tells them to do something different, they gain an audience, and that really upsets the anti-man element within conservatism. But that element is going to get worse, as well as the nymphomaniac female Republican lawmakers as well. So we have not seen the final depths of that. So I forgot one question before we got to LK Rurik, so we're ending on a final question from Dave. Dave asks if they'll think there will be any backlash from the lawfare committed by Trump against his enemies, in the same way that there was a backlash towards the lawfare against himself. I don't think that there'll be quite the thing, because the targets he's picking are very unsympathetic, aren't really heroes to the left, like Comey. They don't give a shit about Comey. They certainly don't give a shit about Bolton. They sort of care about Letitia James, but not to really the same extent about Trump. Trump is the icon of the right. He is the hero, the leader. And them going after the leader forced them to the right to rally behind him and to support him. As they're he's under attack, he's under persecution. They're not attacking DeSantis. They're not attacking anyone else. They're attacking our guy, as it's, they're not just after me. They're not just after me. They're after you. I'm just in the way. That meme that they had. But a lot of people are convinced by that. Comey can't do that. Bolton can't do that. Letitia James can't do that. Maybe Adam Schiff can. I think it probably would. I think Adam Schiff would probably be the only one who might help, and maybe it could help him for 2028. But I don't really see that happening. Not with the people he's gone after so far. So I think it was a unique circumstance for Trump where he is the leader of the right. And he is the guy, the spiritual avatar of the right. And by going after him, people saw this as instinctively as an attack on themselves. And then it further reinforced the idea that he's the leader. And I don't think that's going to happen with any of Trump's targets so far. So that is it for Highly Respected this week. We're going to have more great content coming up this week. And just as a reminder, we might have the mailbag on Thursday rather than Wednesday. And please keep your questions to 2 this week. Let's not go with 3. Actually, it should just be 2 this week. We're not even going to offer the opportunity to have 3. We'll go back to having the option of 3 next week. It'll depending on the schedule of what it looks like. We'll either do Wednesday. Wednesday, I'll post something. It'll be either a link to my AmCon article or an article itself or the mailbag. And then we'll have that. We might only have 1 Substack article this week and 1 AmCon article, but we will have a mailbag and an IQ Summit. So be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.